Oh. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Let me know at any point if there are any issues. As far as questions go and sort of the plan for this, if there are questions that need to be immediately answered, for example, if anything is really unclear about what I said, certainly feel free to chime in. Otherwise, if you want to put questions in the chat, we'll try to answer those at the end or leave time at the end for you to unmute and ask questions. So we're going to talk about insect track and sign on native plants, or what's on those plants. So just a little bit about myself. Eva mentioned a bunch of this already. I'm currently the Interpretive Program Coordinator at Wargo Nature Center, which is in Lino Lakes, part of Anoka County Parks. I've worked as a naturalist for several other sites too. I have a strong interest in wildlife tracking and ecological restoration and about 10 million other things too. I'm an active member of the Minnesota Wildlife Tracking Project, also known as the Tracking Club, which includes insect tracking and a whole host of other things. And then there's actually an international certification system for that. And I hold a certificate at level 3 in there. It's level 1, 2, 3, 4, and specialist. So that level 3 hopefully has a little more context there. So the focus of the talk is we're going to be sort of an overview of the various groups of sign, sort of by the type of sign that it is. Because if you think about how complicated insects are, I mean, just think if you're looking at insects and trying to figure out what it is, unless it's like, you know, a monarch or something really charismatic and distinct, insects are already a complicated topic. And now we're talking about sign. So that's evidence of an insect being there, not the actual insect itself. It gets even more complicated. So we're going to focus just on some major groupings, but I will give some more specific examples as well. So it'll be look at the types, specific examples, and then also covering some specific relationships with certain types of plants. And this whole thing is basically one giant nerd out session on a very obscure topic. And then if this is of interest to you or you want to know a little bit more about it, I'll provide some resources at the end. So the categories of sign I'm looking at, and this is far from inclusive of everything, are nesting sign. So this is things like galls and eggs. And then feeding sign. So this is leaf mining, leaves, and feeding sign on wood. And then things that don't fit neatly in one category, which honestly, most of these things could probably fit in several different categories. So I want to start with galls. So galls, and don't worry, I'll have some pictures here too, is basically deformities to plants. So a plant has a weird growth on it of some sort. That's something caused by an outside organism. Now, this is not the same as a burl on a tree. So you see like an oak or something with a big growth on it. A burl is different. It can look very similar, but it's not quite the same thing. Now, these galls can be caused by a whole bunch of different organisms. We're primarily looking at insects here because that's the focus of the talk. And so basically what causes these galls is an insect, oviposits. It lays eggs in a plant, and then this causes a chemical signaling in that plant that causes it to grow a whole bunch of new tissue and actually increases nutrient production. So this serves as a growing area as well as food for these young insects. And by isolating that damage, it may actually be somewhat beneficial or at least less harmful for these plants. And there was a paper, I'm forgetting the name of the author, from the early 90s that suggested this gall formation may have actually be related to what caused fleshy fruits to start forming. So things like oranges and whatnot. that those were actually caused by insects and producing these growths. So insects may have inadvertently helped in the creation of fruits. Now, when we're looking at galls, there are a lot of them, just as there are many insects. Some general things to think about for looking at galls are initially the location. So is it on a leaf? Is it on a plant stem? Is it elsewhere? You can get these on plant roots too. And then more specifically, where? So like, is it on a leaf stem or like a petiole? Is it on the top of a leaf, bottom of a leaf? In general, the more detail you have, the more helpful. And then the overall shape. They come in a whole variety of shapes. We'll see some examples here. Are there any unique colors? Is there anything else prominent about it? That's worth noting. One thing I didn't put on here, but of course is also very much worth noting, is what type of plant is it on, because they will tend to be pretty specific. So a book I'll talk about later is by a guy named Charlie Eisman. And this is sort of his category for sorting galls. So within leaf galls, there's a whole bunch of different types. I'm not going to read through all of them, but they can be anything from fuzzy little patches to things that look like fingers sticking out to big round circles. You can also get galls on buds. You can get ones that are growing on twigs and stems. And you get these prominent stem swellings too. So I want to look at some specific relationships here. One you are very likely to find either in your own garden or in a park or some other area. And goldenrods are one of the most obvious ones, in my opinion. So there are over 30 species of insects that use solidago or the goldenrods. Most common or most obvious in my mind are the stem gall. So on the plant stem, you get these round growths, and they can be caused by a gallfly if it's this round shape, or if you get these more oval ones, it's caused by several different types of moths. You can also get some leaf growth that is caused by midges and occasionally fruit flies. So I have some pictures of these. So if you look on the left there, that very rounded gall on a goldenrod, that is caused by a single species of gallfly. So what it does is that gallfly lays an egg in the stem, and there's an egg in there, and that egg hatches as this tissue is growing around it. And then that larvae, by the time it turns into a larvae, this whole gall has formed. It chews like 90% of the way out, right up to the edge, but it doesn't go all the way out. And then what it does is it crawls back into the center, and it stays in the middle of that gall. And it will stay there all winter. So it's going through what's called diapause. Basically, it's like insect hibernation. And then in the spring, it will emerge. However, that's assuming it makes it through, because there are lots of things that like to eat them. This is obviously on a green growing plant, but if you were to look at this in the winter, it would look much browner, and you may see some pretty obvious tearing at this gall, because birds like chickadees and woodpeckers love to go in there and eat those little larvae. If you're hanging around a nature center, like where I work, you may also see some that are cut open, because they're a great opportunity to show kids how animals are surviving the winter. And you end up with this little larvae, this little grub, about the size of a grain of rice, maybe a little bit bigger. Some people occasionally use them for ice fishing too, although with how easy it is to buy stuff for ice fishing, it's not necessarily a super common thing, but I have met a few people who do that. A little fun activity we do at nature centers with this, at least where I work, is that little larvae. And I know this may sound gross, but it's totally edible. So we'll let someone try it or pop it in our own mouth. It doesn't taste much. Again, think about it, it's the size of a grain of rice. These things are so common. This is far from a threatened species. And it's just a cool little critter. Now, this is not a housefly, so this is not a fly you have to worry about if you see it in your garden. If you have some goldenrods growing, it's not going to bite you. It's not going to get into your house. It really is only bothering these goldenrods. Now, the one on the right much more oval shaped. That's actually caused by some species of moths. I'll talk about moths and butterflies a little bit later, but not all moths are laying eggs like butterflies on leaves. Some of them are actually injecting an egg into that stem, and it's producing this gall. So both of these show up on goldenrods. Occasionally, I'll see both on the same plant, but it's not super common in my experience. Usually you'll see one or the other. Oaks have even more specialists. We've all heard Doug Tallamy's work on the importance of oaks, and this includes insects that are creating galls. So there's over 1,000 species that use Quercus, are oaks. A couple really prominent ones are oak apple galls that show up on leaves, and acorn plum galls that show up on acorns. The vast majority of galls that we see on oaks are caused by synipid gall wasps, at least of really obvious prominent galls. These gall wasps, by the way, it's not anything like a yellow jacket, hornet. These are ones that are not going to bother you. They're not social wasps. So on the left is a oak apple gall. You can kind of see it's got a little bit of that fruit-like look to it. If you were to cut one open, especially while it's fresh, it has kind of a stringy texture inside, and they'll dry out to more of a brown look later. And then on the right, that is what is known as an acorn plum gall. And so that actually forms on the acorn cap. So not the main part of the fruit, but on the cap itself. And it's called a plum gall. I don't know if I put a picture. I forgot a picture for it. But if you cut it open, it's actually fleshy and looks quite a bit like a plum inside. So it's very distinct from that oak apple gall. First of all, they're on different parts of that oak, and the inside consistency is very different. So again, that acorn plum gall is dense and fleshy and fruit-like, and that oak apple gall is more like airy, stringy, very light inside. These are both caused by a type of wasp, a synipid wasp, but completely different species. So insect eggs are incredibly hard. Usually you can only get to order or family with them. And what I'm referring to there is like taxonomic groupings. So in case it's been a while since you had a biology class, from biggest to smallest, we have kingdom, and then we have phylum, class, order, family, and then genus and species. So orders would be things like Lepidoptera. So that's butterflies and moths, or Orthoptera. Those are grasshoppers and katydids and crickets. So very, very big groups. Many times these eggs are inserted and not readily visible. So galls would be an example of that. Others are quite prominent. Many insects will actually just lay their eggs and leave them uncovered on plants. And there are varying degrees of specificity in terms of like they only use this one plant. For example, monarchs would be the classic example of that, to some that will use things in the same genus or across a whole bunch of different plants. Oh shoot, I'm sorry, I forgot to throw my picture in here. I'll make this presentation available later and I'll be sure to include picture, but ladybugs, both native and non-native. I'm sure many of you have experienced issues with Asian lady beetles, but they're typically in very tightly clustered groups, usually on the bottoms of leaves, and they're quite bright yellow and orange. Now, as you can imagine, they're very small, but because they form these clusters, they're usually pretty prominent. There are a few other things that have eggs that look like this, but the clustering and color combination can be a good indicator that it might be a ladybug. So these are mostly not host specific, so it doesn't quite fit into the theme of the talk, but they're common enough that I think it's one that's worth knowing. There are actually some ladybugs that are plant eaters. They're herbaceous, herbivores, that are host specific because they are plant eaters rather than than feeding on other insects. One example of this would be the squash lady beetle or squash ladybug. Lepidoptera, so our moths and butterflies, there can be a whole host of different types and appearances. One I want to talk about are what we see are admirals and viceroys. So red admiral is a fairly common woodland butterfly around here. I'm sure many of you have seen it before. And these admirals and viceroys, they have sort of like honeycomb like eggs. They have often sort of this textured pattern to them. And specifically red admirals are primarily, although I was reading a little bit more about it, maybe not exclusively specific to nettles. And this includes non-stinging species. So there are things known as false nettles, which is kind of funny because they're related to nettles, but things in the Urticaceae family or nettles. So the next time you're cursing nettles because you run into a nettle patch, you can appreciate the fact that we get red admiral butterflies from them. So as an example of what this looks like, those are the eggs for them, very zoomed in. These both in case you're not familiar with our adult red admiral, it's kind of unusual shaped egg from our app. Okay, so I'm going to move on to feeding sign. So leaf mining, probably everyone here has seen it, even if they don't think they have, or they have no idea what this is. So this is not an insect outside of a leaf that is chewing on it. These are insects, specifically insect larvae, so think caterpillar stage of life, that are so small that they are literally inside the leaf. So think about how thin a leaf is between that top and bottom. There is something actually living inside that leaf. And what it's doing is it's feeding and moving around. So it's making these trails and these paths on leaves. Most of the time, this is caused by moths and flies. Often these are referred to as things like micro moths, because you can think if their larvae are that small, the adults are also very small. So this is nothing like a monarch or red admiral sized critter. They're very, very small. This can also include some sawflies and beetles. And they tend to be highly, highly host specific. By knowing the host, and generally just the genus is fine. So if you know it's a type of milkweed, but you don't know the exact species, that usually doesn't matter. So that, and then sort of the characteristics of the leaf mine. So the shape can matter or can make a big difference. Some plants that at least I have noticed in my personal observations seem to have a ton of leaf mines. White snakeroot is one that I see a lot of it on. I see a fair amount on goldenrods too, and other species. Kind of a general pattern for this is we get linear and we get blotch mines. So I have some examples of those here. So here, this is a white snakeroot leaf, a plant probably many of you are familiar with. And all these little squiggly lines here are from larvae that are inside that leaf, chewing and eating their way through. This one is caused by agromysid fly. And that squiggly shape and the fact that it is on this type of leaf can help you figure out what it is. I was actually reading there is a leaf mine that was found here in Minnesota and I think also in Wisconsin from an agromysid fly that actually hasn't been identified to species yet. So this is sort of an area that's really understudied. As sort of an interesting aside, Charlie Eisman, who is by far the expert on this topic of leaf mining, he has no formal training in entomology besides doing one undergraduate class in entomology, but he dedicated himself to doing this. So he studies these, he raises these inside, and he's identified, I think, several hundred new species. So if you, at this point in your life, are thinking, I would like to be a scientist and do something, this is an area that is super understudied. And Charlie Eisman has tons of resources on how you can get more involved with it. And I'll talk more about him a little bit later too. So this would be an example of a blotch leaf line. So if we look back, we can see that squiggly line, linear, and this is from a species of moth on black cherry. So there are those blotches and the circles, that's actually from where it emerged. Now, some are called blotch linear because you can kind of see here, there's like a little bit of a squiggly line there, but more or less it's kind of a single spot, and this emerged later. So this is not a feeding sign from something eating from the outside, that's actually where it emerged from. All right, so some feeding sign in leaves or things that look like feeding sign. So looking at some cuts in leaves, leaf cutter bees, they're not actually feeding, they're using it for their nesting. And this, they can use a variety of species around here. More common things to use are ash, roses, and rubus. So things like blackberries and raspberries. Beetles will also make cuts in there. I'm sure many people have seen that with Japanese beetles. They often make sort of irregular, jagged holes throughout the leaf, or will do what's called skeletonizing it, where they're feeding in such a way that you end up with those leaf veins. So it's kind of like the skeleton of your leaf. And then Lepidopterus are butterflies and moths, and Orthoptera are grasshoppers and katydids. They tend to be in leaf edge feeders, so they're just eating the edges. But there's some distinct differences. Caterpillars tend to leave really nice, smooth, clean edges, which can make it look a little bit more like a leaf cutter bee. And those Orthoptera tend to leave really jagged edges. So just as an example here, this is on an ash, which, as I mentioned before, is one of the more common for leaf cutter bees. So these are actually leaf cutter bee marks right here. So they make these nice smooth circles. They can be of varying size. Sometimes, and I don't have a picture of it here, they can be a little bit more elongated, so not quite as circular, but a little more rectangular looking. But they're cutting this off and using this in their nesting. So it is a sign of it on there. It's not actually feeding. Like I said, many of these things don't necessarily fit perfectly into nice, neat categories. And then feeding signs on wood. So most of this is caused by beetles. Wood-boring jewel beetles, those in the family Buprestidae, are one of the most common for this. There's also longhorn beetles, bark beetles, blister beetles, a whole bunch. So I have just a couple examples of that. This is from one of those Buprestidae, a wood-boring jewel beetle. And this is one everyone should be familiar with. It has this distinct curvy pattern and just shows up on one type of tree around here. I'm curious if anyone knows what it is. If you put it in the chat, I will, I want to see if anyone can get it. Yeah, I see Deborah got it right. Yep, this is from emerald ash borer. Now, that's obviously one of the species we don't want around, but we have a whole bunch of native jewel beetles that are doing the same thing. So the larvae are inside there, and there are different shapes in each. Just like with the emerald ash borer, they're often very host specific. So over long evolutionary times, they've developed relationships where they can deal with all those compounds that plants produce. So a lot of the things that we like about plants, like caffeine, are compounds that plants produce, usually to keep things from eating them. But in some cases, species such as insects become adapted to eating them. And they become very specific to it. Again, the classic example being monarchs and milkweeds. And then this last type is really cool looking. It kind of looks like one of those house centipedes you might see running around in your basement, but this is not from a centipede. This is from one of those bark beetles. By the way, both this and what we see here too are referred to as bark galleries or beetle galleries within bark. And so these are chambers for an adult and the eggs, and they actually emerge and exit from here. So that you get these very different patterns depending on what type of beetle or other insect you might be looking at. So there are literally whole books written on these things, including some that are specific on galls. What I didn't want to do necessarily was try to give you information on exact ones you're going to find on each plant, because those resources exist out there and you'd probably forget if I just tell you, but I wanted to give you a sense of those major categories. Now, if you want to dive into it a little bit more, Tracks and Sign of Insects by Charlie Eisman, who I talked about before, along with his co-author Noah Charney, are really excellent. If you're really just interested in what you're seeing on plants, Garden Insects of North America is fabulous. It's sorted by sort of the general type of sign, so like feeding on leaves versus other things, and it tells you what insects might be causing that. The Track and Sign of Insects goes beyond just what we're seeing on plants and includes actual tracks, although you can't see details of the tracks, but you can see, like in really sandy conditions, different insects leave sort of different marks in the sand as they move along, and all sorts of things that are not necessarily plant related. So if you want just something really plant focused, that Garden Insects of North America would be the one to go to. If you want to try to figure out what type of gall you might have, someone has put together a website called Gall Formers. That's gallformers.org. And you can put in the species of plant you have or just the genus, and it will give you a whole host of different insects that are utilizing those type of plants. And then Charlie Eisman runs a blog at bugtracks.wordpress.com. Really fabulous site. As I mentioned, he's the expert in leaf mining, and I want to show you a book he has put together. So this book is actually only available as an ebook. Most recently, he was selling his first edition for $5. Again, just an e-edition available as a PDF. He's working on a second edition, but someone apparently decided to print out this book. And you can see it's so big, they literally had to hold it together with bolts. In contrast, here his one just on general insect sign. So you could take a very, very specific sort of nerdy topic and go even deeper down the rabbit hole with it. What's really nice about this book, though, is there's a section where it has all the plants by genus. So if you have, a solidago, a goldenrod, or a rosa, your roses, and then there's keys in there, and you can figure out, hey, what critter is actually utilizing my plant? And what I like about stuff like this is it goes well beyond sort of the classic focus on pollinators. Pollinators are awesome and super important, and it's great to know that they exist out there. And obviously some of this includes pollinators too, but the relationship between these plants and animals is much more complex than trying to just save the monarchs or save the bees or save the butterflies. There's a whole host of things that are all interacting together. And in many cases, we don't even understand their exact role in the ecosystem. We understand, this insect has this specific relationship with this plant, and someone could go, well, why does that matter? And I would respond with, well, we don't know, but it probably has some role. And Aldo Leopold had a quote along the lines of, how did it go? Something along the lines of, the first rule of clever tinkering is to save all the parts. So there's all these complex relationships that exist out there, these stories that are happening between these insects and their plants and other insects utilizing those plants that we don't even understand, but have some importance. So just sort of a parting thought with that as to why you might even care about this a little bit beyond just wanting to figure out what is eating your plants. And then if this is like way too much information, like I don't care what is mining in my leaves, or like I never want to figure out what species it is. I'm good just knowing that it's a leaf miner. Just one final parting thought. This is from someone runs a page called the Crypto Naturalist. It's available as a podcast too. And I really like this quote. It's learning is lovely, but you don't need any special knowledge to connect with the natural world. Please don't be shy about embracing your passion for wild spaces just because you can't name all the species you see. Your connection to nature needs neither expertise nor language. So again, if you never spend any time learning to identify different galls, I think it's fabulous just to know that they exist and to be like, hey, that looks like that could be a gall, or there's a leaf miner, or there's something that's interacting here in my garden or the natural spaces that I spend time. Some of us, such as myself, really like to geek out about it and learn more about it. But I hope, if nothing else, you can learn to appreciate that it exists. And if it captivated your interest, maybe you can spend some time learning more about it. If you end up having questions in the future, and I'll take questions here in a second, of you see something in your garden or in a natural space and you want to know what it is, if you go to our chapter website, bigriverbigwoods.org, and find the email on there, send an email, and that'll get forwarded to me. I'm more than happy to help you try to identify things that you might be seeing. No guarantees that I can figure it out, but I always love a good challenge like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing here, and I'm happy to take questions at this time.
Hey, Eric, I'm just going to go back a little bit just to point out a couple things that were written in along the way. Deb mentioned when you were talking about leaf mining, columbine leaf mining, and I was thinking through as you were talking about the white snake root. Yes, I've seen it on snake root, and I was like, what is it that I always see it on? And I was so glad when she put columbine. I was like, yay, that is. So good catch there. Mark and Deb chimed in that it was emerald ash borer very quickly. So big clap for our folks that were brave and wrote the right answer and wrote it in quickly. We have a question from, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Shanthai, I'm gonna guess. And it just says, thank you for the informative talk. What's the name of the ebook again?
Yeah, the ebook, let me get you the full name. It is Leaf Miners of North America by Charlie Eisman. So if you go to his website, that's bugtracks.wordpress.org or .com now. .com. So bugtracks.wordpress.com. I'll put it in the comments here.
Yeah, if you put that in the comments, and then I'll just read some of the thank yous we're getting. Thank you so much for this great talk. Pretty cool to look at native plants from a different perspective. Thanks. And then great talk, Eric. Thanks. Wow, Eric. I'm feeling more appreciative of the insects in my yard and that I've seen in the galls. I'm always fascinated by galls. But just to kind of have a little sense of that little piece of rice larva in there. I'm not probably going to eat it, but I might, who knows? Liz asks, Eric, how did you get your level 3 tracker certification?
Yeah, so I'll try to get the short version of it. Lots of time practicing, and then so the tracker certification system that actually originated in South Africa, and they have sort of a standardized routine for asking questions based off sort of the perceived complexity of it. And evaluators will do these evaluations at different sites. The Minnesota Tracking Club hosts evaluators here, typically once or twice a year. You sign up for it. And it's much more than an evaluation. It's really like a masterclass workshop type thing, because you'll have a series of questions, and then what they do is they go through it. That you write down your answer, you show them your answer, and what they'll do is they'll go through it and they'll explain it in a way meant to help everyone learn more. So it's really a fabulous experience. It does tend to be primarily focused on mammals and birds, just because tracks and sign of them are so much more obvious, but there are always insect questions too. And to get to different levels, they have a scoring system. For a level 3, it's 90% and above. So hopefully that answers the question.
And then Deb asked a question, could you possibly describe the track left in a stem by the four-lined bug? Four-lined bug is supposed to lay eggs in the stem of host plants like Liatris libellus stylus, maybe Eupatorium maculatum. I don't know which one that is. Sorry, I'm not. Do you see it? Hi, Deb.
Yeah, I see it. I actually don't remember what the distinctive pattern for a four-lined bug is. However, I see, Eva, you put a link or the email in the comments. If you send an email there, it'll get sent to me and then I'll have your email. I'm happy to look into it and try to get you more of an answer.
Oh, Joe Pye, yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, this is one of those where, again, there are so many insects and I can readily identify, a few common signs just from looking at them. But otherwise, that's why those books exist. So I can go reference it. So yeah, I'd be more than happy to get you an answer. I don't remember off the top of my head.
So I think you answered a question of, yes, it would be in one of those, the answer would be in one of those books.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then, boy, everyone's interested in you, Eric. Like, how did you get to be the wonderful nerd that you are, as we nerded out tonight? Where did you get your naturalist training?
So I studied outdoor education at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and then worked a few places before landing some naturalist positions, and honestly mostly just hanging out with other nerdy folks and asking questions and reading books. So going on things like Wild Ones walks, just a little plug for those, are a great place to learn, whether it's me there sharing stuff or other people even just asking questions or sharing information that I don't know, because I certainly don't know all of it, is super fabulous. Podcasts, books. There are a couple actually really great podcasts about galls and leaf mining. Like I mentioned, I'll put together a resources thing that we can get up on maybe on the website or email out to people who signed up for the meeting tonight. So
that sounds good. Yeah, I think your illustration of Charlie Eisman's book being so thick, it maybe will help us when we feel a little intimidated when we go on a walk or go on a tour and don't remember the common name or the Latin name or identifying things. But I think we're, as Wild Ones, working on appreciation. Mm-hmm. And I think insects are something definitely underappreciated. And I'm just happy to see we had such a good turnout tonight.
Yeah, like I was saying, it's so interesting, even if you don't know the details of it, just to have this sense that there's these whole big complicated relationships and whole universes that are so separate from our own experiences that they're hard to conceptualize. And not all of it has obvious benefit, but some, like maybe the evolution of fleshy fruits. So if you like oranges and raspberries and apples, that may be related to something like gall formation. And one of those reasons to appreciate things that might not always be easy to appreciate otherwise, like insects on your plants. Although obviously folks in Wild Ones may have a slightly different view of that from more conventional gardeners.
And maybe other people have this, or maybe I'm the only one, but when you said that the plant responds by creating the gall, or, I didn't think of it as that interaction. Mm-hmm. Which is what we're kind of understanding more about everything in our environment, is that there are interactions between trees and between, native plant communities that we just, like Aldo Leopold's, we don't know so many things, but we can appreciate as we learn more from good speakers like you. We have insects are amazing to watch. Yeah, I think it helps us all slow down and look at the world a little more carefully once an insect catches our eye or a plant. on another. Yeah, thank you. That was great. We got another comment. I will look at plants in a whole new way. Yeah, I think sometimes conventional gardeners can think, oh, something's eating my plant, I have to stop that. And I'm like, when I'm in my yard, I'm thinking, I'm trying to create food for you guys. You know, I want a balance out there. I don't want all of one thing probably, but I'm trying to create, I'm trying to feed those little guys. And I don't always know who they are out there, but that's the point. So, are any insects active as the weather gets colder? Mark asks.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are several insects and other invertebrates that can be relatively active in cooler conditions. There's a group of them known as winter moths that are actually able to generate body heat through activity, despite kind of the general assumption about cold-blooded critters like insects can't be active in cool weather. Some can.
How about when we were out at Tamarack? Weren't there like snow fleas or something? Or what?
Yes, yeah. So snow fleas, snow fleas are not actually insects. They're related. They're in a group called hexapods. So it's kind of like they're precursors to insects. Yeah, so they can be active. They're springtails. And yeah, so you'll see them hopping around usually in late winter. So those like super cold January days, not much is going to be active, at least not in more obvious cold layers. Potentially deeper in the soil or elsewhere things could be. Yeah, there are definitely things that are active in winter. So some spider species, springtails, some species of moth can be active. Actually, Charlie Eisman, you can see I'm going to keep referencing him because he's done most of the work on this, has a course he did online with a nature center in Vermont, North Branch Nature Center. So that the course is over, but you can still get paid access to it. And it's all about finding insects in winter at different stages. So like how you would find them, where they're hibernating or dormant or might be active, anything from eggs all the way up to adults. So there is actually quite a bit happening in winter. Obviously not nearly as much as you would expect to see in the summer months.
Yeah, good question. I really finding out about that. Eric, do you see Alicia's question, or do you want me to?
Let's see.
She saw, or comment basically, she saw this advertised on Instagram. So a shout out to Crystal for posting on Instagram, and thank you for connecting with us through that source. She saw her first bottle gentian this fall at Bald Eagle Regional Park because of your post about the Wild Walk. So hey, we're enjoying that. Our walks are good for lots of reasons. Jody Thomas says thank you. So should we, any more questions, you guys? Should we wrap it up? Are we doing? Sounds like a quiet bunch. Well, thank you, Eric. That was just fascinating. We're always appreciative of everything you do for our chapter. I think we're very fortunate. Liz is giving you a clap. I'll give you a clap. We look forward to seeing everyone in November. Check out Wild Ones National. There's so many good resources on wildones.org. We have great resources on our page, bigriverbigwoods.org. You can check us out on Instagram and Facebook. We want to connect with you in person at our walk on the 7th. And if you do sign up for that, we'll send out a note, an email. If you sign up for that, just use your best common sense about the weather, and it's really terrible. Don't show up or just bundle up, whatever you need to do. And we'll be socially distant outdoors, and it'll be fun. And then we'll be together again for our Zoom meeting on the 18th. Did I get that date right? With Heather Holm. I hope you can make it. This is the insect portion of our club. We're really, going whole hog on. We should hit whole bug on insects this fall, and I think it's so helpful to charge us up to keep planting things in our yards and taking care of nature as we can. Anything else, guys? All right. Thank you so much. Have a good week, month. See you soon.